If I get in your way, let me know. I move around.
Oh, you're fine. This one being recorded too.
Just checking if the stream works. Why is this working? That's not the one, is it? Morning. Sign in, please. Too late. Not you. You're not late.
Okay.
Oh, that's for everyone.
I'm sorry. No, it's just for the ones that are coming in late. Kind of hard to keep track sometimes with coming in. Just gotta figure out. Give me 1 second, guys. Live. Boom. Alright, yeah. Working. Okay. So this will be a lot better this time. If you guys want to watch this again afterwards, I will post a link in the announcements. Okay. If there's any questions. All right. So lecture 2, we're going to talk about a little bit more about editing, and I'm going to introduce you guys, besides to the elastic audio, which we're going to dig into a little bit, and to Beat Detective. I'm going to talk a little bit about some sidechain processing and what it's good for, especially for cleaning up bleed in a drum mix. And we might get to session organization and busing, but I'm not sure if we might get there. So, first thing we learned in the lab was, the first thing you do is check phase. Right, check phase. Right, so we make sure kick is in phase with the overheads, then the 2 kicks are in phase with each other. Snare is in phase with the overheads, then the 2 snares are in phase with each other, and that's how we make sure everything is lining up and there are no phase cancellations. Then the second thing you should do is go through your entire drum performance and check for weak hits. Right, it happens. You know, drummer's not a machine. He doesn't have a velocity setting, right? So we gotta make sure that within the kicks and the snares, through a performance, that it represents what the material, the rest of the song is. I mean, it is okay if there's a softer section that there are softer kicks or softer snares. We all understand that. But there's also sometimes the energy kind of driven part where he hits the snare just not quite right, a little bit to the side, and the level is different, the sound is different, and it's very easy to replace those, right? You audition them, you look for the weak hits. Sometimes I go through and just kind of set markers, go through the session, say maybe I want to take a look at that. You can often see it, right? If you see a snare and it suddenly goes like this and it comes back up, maybe you should look at that snare hit, right? And then you find a good average hit that represents the average volume hit of that song. You grab it and you paste it on top of it. What tool in Pro Tools do we use to do that? To get right to that sample? Tap to transient, right. So, and then after you've done this, if you are going to quantize these drums, it would happen before you do this. That's very important. Because one thing you don't want, either in Beat Detective or in Elastic Audio, is a lot of small audio files, right? So if you would start cleaning this tom track, you would have all these toms, and they wouldn't shift right? So what you want is consecutive or continuous audio when you deal with Elastic Audio or Beat Detective. So always do that before you edit the toms, right? So, but how do we clean the toms? Same kind of thing, right? Tap to transient. Make sure you don't cut it too short. Make sure it has a nice ring to it before you fade it out. I try to do longer fades on toms than I probably would on other things, just to almost recreate that natural ring going down. You know, the natural extension is bless you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Of course, the lower the sound, the longer the ring, right? If it's a really ding, high tom, it's going to be pretty short. But if it's a huge cannonball floor tom, 2-3 seconds might not be enough. You know, if you guys ever heard these Japanese drums, what are they called again? Taiko. Guys ever heard taiko drums? Oh, this is like when you really want some impact and some film scoring, you want to get taiko drum samples. These things are huge. These are big hanging drums that they hit with very, very big hammers. And when you get a sample of that, that thing is at least 8-10 seconds long. I mean, it's long. It rings for a long time. And that's how you want to edit it too. So, I know we never opened Beat Detective, but I'm going to make a quick comparison between the two. The very first observation that I can give you as somebody that's been using Beat Detective for 20-something years, right? Since the first introduced it in Pro Tools, who knows what, right? It was a long time ago. Is that is the choice, because the difference between the two is in Beat Detective, things are moved, not warped. Okay, you follow me? What happens in Elastic Audio? It stretches the front and the back of each sample kind of out to make it fit the quantization, right? What happens in Beat Detective is it looks at the same event markers, but it says chop, 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 makes individual audio files and moves them. So why would that be better? You don't stretch the audio file, right? What happens when you stretch audio? It starts to kind of, yeah, it gets kind of funky the more you do it, right? But what happens when I move audio all over the place? I will have gaps, right? Gaps are no good either, or overlaps are not good either. So it deals with it in another way, right? It fills gaps automatically with the space of the following clip. So it takes the following clip, and if there's a gap, it pulls that clip back out, fills it with silence, and then crossfades creates it for you. Now the thing with this is, that's the really big one here. Beat Detective is not as fast as Elastic Audio. So if you're looking for a quick solution, Elastic Audio is great. You know, you put it on the track, you enable the rhythmic mode, you look at your event markers, you lower sensitivity, you press option 0, quantize, boom, in 2 minutes you can have an entire kit sounding like it was Beat Detective. But that's not how Beat Detective works. Beat Detective, you gotta kind of do piece by piece. You cannot select an entire song, it will fail, I promise you. And I know people try it all the time. Well, why doesn't it work with the whole song? It doesn't. You have to do it in sections, right? And a lot of times, especially if the drummer was driving, if he's ahead, you're gonna have so many bad edits in there that you might as well just start over. But if a drummer is laid back, for some reason, it works a little better. So what I often do in Beat Detective, I actually push the drums back a little bit before I do it. I just remember by how much I nudge it, right? And when I'm done doing it, I nudge it back. You see what I'm saying? But if every kick is slightly before the grid, you'll see every one of those things cut off. And that will completely make it an unusable method. So it separates the audio at the same kind of event or transient markers that you would see in Elastic Audio. So there is also a sensitivity setting, right? If it's too high, it's going to separate too much. So you need to make sure that sensitivity setting also makes sense. So same thing, right? It creates event markers. They're converted into warp markers. But the individual events are stretched. So what I want to do is I want to open the session from our studio session. But here's the thing, guys. I don't want to open what we've already edited. So if you guys still have the original, would be great. If we have to open the edited one, that's fine too. The one that we worked on Wednesday. But if you have the original, we can actually start from scratch, which would be a little better. Okay?
It's the one that we worked on last.
Right, but not the one you saved last, if you can. So if there's still an older version of it, that would be great. And just to be sure, we don't save over any work that you've done. If you have it open, once it is open, save as add BT or beat detective or anything to the name so you don't mess up your original version, okay?
Okay.
I'm gonna turn the light down.
It's not the original
Oh, not that much. There's no B here, there's no in between here? That's really hard to see. It doesn't have to be exactly this, guys. Just when you save as, just add something so you don't save over your session, okay? Now you can go ahead and mute everything except the drums. We don't really care about anything else in this session right now. All I want to walk you through is how that would actually work to apply beat detective to a session, right? So just like in Elastic Audio, what's the first thing we gotta make sure when we work on drums? That it's
the files need to be.
they're full, but that's also that it's grouped, right?
Yeah.
Make sure the group is on. Make sure it's not suspended or disabled. So if you select something, the good way to test it is always to use your selection tool and swipe over any one of those files, kick, snare, hi-hat, and it should select all of them, right? That's how we always know it's grouped. So I don't care if we're on what take we're on. It doesn't matter. We're not going through any of that stuff, guys. I just want to show you the method. Does everybody have something open? Who does not?
It's not opening.
No, I'm opening it now.
Who does not have a session open at this point?
It's opening.
It's open? Okay.
It's opening.
It's opening? Okay. So first, save as, right? Save as something, something. The exact labeling is not important. We don't need it. Again, we just want to run through it. So how does this work? Well, make sure your drum tracks are grouped. Okay? Let's get here quickly, guys. So everybody is at a point where we can turn on grid mode, please. Enable grid mode. And I want you to set your grid to 1 bar. Not relative grid, but grid, which is blue. Relative grid is purple. Right? Regular grid. Grid mode. Okay, and set your grid to 1 bar. Where's your grid setting? Right there, right? Yeah, there you go. Anybody who needs to know where that is? Okay, so you're in grid mode already, and your grid value is right here. So just click on the little arrow right next to it, and go to 1 bar, all the way up. There you go. Why are you grayed out? Oh, you have no output. Make sure you all just option click on the output and set everything to output 1 and 2, please, so we actually be able to hear it. Okay? Option, hold option, click on any of the outputs.
That's what I forgot to do.
And
Forgot to hold the option earlier.
there you go. Option does everything, right? Shift option does what?
What's selected?
Only what's selected, right? Big difference. Imagine you have spent 30 minutes routing an entire session, and by mistake you hold option and you click 1 output. You will be really mad. There's no undo to that. That's why save often, so you can go back to it, right? I'm like, my hand pretty much lives on Command S, you know? Besides, Pro Tools has great autosave features that if you go into your preferences and you actually check them, you can set them to do 99 or 999 backups every 59 seconds or something like that. It's pretty crazy. So I set mine to 5 minutes. If I lose 5 minutes of work, I can deal with it, right? And I set mine to be, I think, 99. So I have 99 backups in there. All right, so what we want to do is we want to select 8 bars of this. So we have actually markers in here. Why don't we go for the chorus? Why don't we select 8 bars of the chorus? So go take your select tool and select the 8 bars of the drums in the chorus. So just click right down here. You're in grid mode, so you can't really miss. It's a whole bar grid, and just keep pulling 8 bars over, and this will tell you how much you actually selected. So you guys know next on the meter on top, it shows you exactly how much you're selecting, right? And what I even do sometimes, if I know exactly what I want to select, is I just click where I start, I go up to the number and I type it in. I want 8 bars, boom, enter. Now I got exactly 8 bars, right? So,
Starting on the chorus?
yeah, starting on the chorus. What are you doing?
I'm still down.
The lap? No. This is not a lap file. This is the session from Monday.
Oh, I wasn't.
Yeah, but there was an announcement that you're supposed to have downloaded it for the last lab.
Oh,
Did you not come to the last lab either? Wednesday?
I missed that too.
That means you're already over.
Oh, this is over,
Over 8 hours.
oh, I thought 8 hours like limit.
No, you're over 8 hours though. Because you choose 6 hours on Monday, 4 hours on Wednesday, that's 10.
Well, no, I came to the lecture though.
You came to the lecture, so
Yeah.
you're at 8 hours.
Yeah.
Okay. But I said that in the announcement, if you haven't downloaded it, it's automatic GPS point deductions. Just so you know. That's why I make announcements, that's why I make downloads available 2 days before the lab.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So, okay, so you have it selected, everybody had selected. Okay. Now, what we usually would do before we do anything violent like Beat Detective is we protect ourselves and duplicate the playlist, right? Then we can always go back if we mess up and say, oh, well, let's not do that again, and go back to your playlist and still have the original drums, right? We don't have to do that right now, but that's what you normally would do, okay? Now, we have already selected a range, right? So it's very important in Beat Detective, let's go ahead and everybody open Beat Detective. Do you guys know where to find it? Event. If you look in the menu, Event, you'll see Beat Detective. Now, if you have a numeric keypad, it's Command 8, but on the numeric keypad, the regular 8 won't work. Wow, your screen is dark. How can you see anything? Okay, so what I said was, now that you guys see the Beat Detective window, this here is very important that it reflects exactly what the top meter, whatever the display shows. If that's not the same, the Beat Detective will not work, right? But it's very simple because if it's not showing the same, we just press Capture Selection and it's going to grab the front and the back and put it in there. So if you have an uneven number, if you can still transfer it from your selection to that window, but just make sure you do that, okay? Now, here are our steps that we can do. Now, the first one is actually a bar beat marker generator. This could be great if you're working on a film score and there is some audio there already and you want to grab markers from that, right? From that performance, right? There's something there and you want to, you guys done this, right? In, or maybe you're getting to that in game composition, but sometimes you'll have a score, there's certain elements in it, you want to grab the hit points for that. This can help, right? Now, second one, it says groove template extrusion or extraction. I can't even see that. What does it say?
Extraction.
Extraction. Okay, extrusion would be the same thing anyway. But what does that do? Right? So you have this killer performance. I know I'm going to rip this thing off. Just be careful when you walk over here. You have this killer performance. The groove of somebody is just so amazing that you want to apply that groove to the rest of your audio or MIDI, right? And that you can actually extract that performance's groove and save it as a groove template and then apply it to whatever you want. You can do that in Logic too. We don't talk about that much because it's a little bit advanced to do it and it's a little tricky too, but same thing here. So we're not doing that right now, so we can skip that step. So what's the next step? It's clip separation. That's the one we're looking for, right? We have to analyze this and then separate it. So let's click on clip separation. And then the next thing is we might want to really zoom in so we can, your zoom is good. Go ahead and zoom in about 3-4 times. Just press T if your thing is on. Right there is good, right there. And then let's go over just a little bit so we can see it. Okay. Yeah, not too soon, that's good. And what we want to do now is we want to press with detection being on normal and the analysis being enhanced, contains 16 notes. That should all be the same here, right? And then also the resolution is subbeats. We want to press analyze. And you press analyze, nothing's going to happen because your sensitivity setting is probably set to 0. Because that's the default. So what we want to do is keep watching the audio and bring that sensitivity setting up. And you're going to start seeing the same lines pop up that you would see when you do elastic audio.
Oh, why am I not able to select the subbeats?
That's good. That's a good question. Are you in 16th? You are. You have captured. You're in normal.
Okay.
Maybe you have to press analyze first.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't know that. Okay, there you go. Now you guys pull that sensitivity setting up, you start seeing all these purple lines pop up, right?
Yeah.
And you see that that's completely different than elastic audio in the way that a little goes a long way. Like with elastic audio, we came down from 100 to 80 something and it was already starting to disappear. Here you get to 13% and it's like way too much, right? So what do we look for again? All the kicks and snares, right? All the kicks and snares. So all the in-between stuff, let's not do that. So let's pull that sensitivity to a setting that's way too low, right? So let's bring that up to a setting where we see the kicks and the snares, maybe a little bit in between. I'd like to see this too. You see what I'm saying? But I'm not sure if we can get there. Let's see. We gotta get too high to do that. Yeah. Okay, so there's a point at which point you pull up and nothing else happens. That's the one you stop. See what I'm saying? Like you pull it up and there's a like a 2% pointage where you pull up and suddenly a lot of lines pop up and then you can go and go and go and nothing else changes. That's right the spot you want to be at.
Oh, crap.
You see what I'm saying?
No. Well, it's really high.
I should definitely be zoomed in a little more. And then, whoa. Why you guys have such fast mice? That's way too high. So, see that in between stuff, you don't want that. No. But there's a point where you lose them. Right there you want to be.
Okay.
You see that?
So
right
we're
right
not
when you're
just-
way too high. But
We're
actually
not
it didn't look so. Pull up, pull up, pull up, pull up, stop. Maybe one more. I'm looking at that, right? That does get too much, yeah. So here, is there a rule exactly how to do this? No. You're gonna have to play with it, right? Yes.
What's the difference between subbeats and beats?
It depends on the subdivision of what the drummer is playing. So if you would have, for instance, a drummer just go, are there subbeats when I do this? No, right? But if I go,
Okay, gotcha.
there's subbeats, right?
Right.
There's the quarter, there's the eighth, and sometimes even, and that would really be the subbeat. Now, there's two settings about that. There's subbeats and there is
Beats.
that one too. It asks you, what does this contain?
Yeah, right.
Now we could have set this to 8 and it probably would work exactly the same way on this drum track because he's not really playing that much in between stuff, right? But then think about the drum fills, not just the main groove. Because if he goes, even if he goes, dun, 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 that's 16th. And if you say 8th right there, it might not realize that. But it really comes down to the, you can try just beats, but that would be really straight quarter notes, and usually that is not quite enough, right? So what's our actual function here is to separate. So wherever you see these lines right now, if you push this button, it will cut, 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 cut. Go ahead and do that.
So in my session, I've already applied quantization through
You
elastic
did
audio.
the last one. You're not going to do anything.
Yes.
But go ahead and
But
separate
would
it anyway.
Would it like make a difference? Like,
At this point, no.
No.
No,
Okay.
it's already quantized. But go ahead and press separate anyway. So now we gotta go to, now once it's separated, we wanna quantize it, right? And here that's called conform. So we go to the next function down. Did you separate?
Mm-hmm.
Let's go ahead and go to conform. Yes.
I don't know about anything.
Yeah, that's a little high. So let's pull it down. Right, so boom.
I think
Right.
there's a session.
Oh, we're just going down to the next one.
Oh, so it's already, yeah,
Right here?
that's okay. It's all right. If you got too many, that's all right at this point too.
Is
Yes,
this
sir.
the conformat he's talking about?
Yes, sir.
When I click separate, I left this on 1/4 node. Should I change the value?
It should have been 16s.
Okay.
So go ahead and undo.
Yeah, Control Z.
Then
So-
set this to 16s. And did you do capture selection before you did it?
I did not. Click
Okay,
that, no.
capture selection. That's the first thing you gotta do. Go ahead.
Capture selection.
And then analyze is good, that is good, separate.
Did I?
Yeah,
Am
that's
I
good.
good?
It has to be going.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Separate. Yeah, and then the conform. Okay, so now that we're in conform, all we really have to do is make sure that the signature is right, the start and the end is right, still the same, and then we tell it contains 16 notes. And all we gotta do is press conform. It's like quantize, right? So go ahead, press conform, and everything should have shifted just slightly, unless you're in a quantized session and nothing will shift at all. Right, it's okay then. We just walk through the steps, okay? So did you go separate? Okay, go to conform. Click conform right here. Press conform. Now go to the next one. Now this is a little tricky. The edit smoothing. So what does this do? This fills our gaps or does not, right? So if you guys click on that, you'll see several things here. It says, so basically edit smoothing here. Fill gaps or fill and crossfade. Which one do you think you should do?
Fill and crossfade.
Of course, right? That way we don't have any pops in it. Now it also gives you an option of how long those crossfades should be, and I think the default setting is 5 milliseconds on that, and I think that's good. You could go shorter if you wanted to. Depends on how fine your edits are. If you're getting, imagine if you start having edits that are only 10 milliseconds long and each side of the crossfade is 5 milliseconds, all you have is crossfades, right? So then you might want to go just a little shorter, maybe even 3, you know, or 2. Okay, and then you would press separate. You would, so on the next one you would press smooth, and you would be done with that section. Now what you would have to do is go to the beginning of that section and make sure that the first kick is not cut off. Why? Because we used grid mode to select, and if you played early, it wasn't even part of the quantization. You see what I'm saying? And that might be one that we'll have to move by hand, which is not that hard. So, you can actually, if you really want to fine-tune those edits before you press separate, if you guys see this on the bottom here, scroll left and right, you can zoom in and you can hit scroll left and right, and it will take you through the markers. And you can actually, if you know how to use the transport pre-roll function, you can actually pre-roll that and make sure that that's right at the spot where you want the edit to be. Just like elastic audio, right? If we have a marker we don't like, we get rid of it. And if we need an additional marker, we edit by hand. It's the same principle, really. It's just the execution of the editing is actually different, you know. Now, here's one I'm interested if you guys know this. Now, Logic has 2 modes too. You guys know what they are when it comes to rhythmically adjusting things. No?
Oh.
Wasn't it like it was to like a beats to a grid and then samples?
That is, okay, so that is the mode of what a track can be, right? It can be either tick-based or it can be sample-based. But there are 2, okay, so just think about it for a second, guys. Flex modes, right?
Yeah.
What's the first one? Pitch.
Flex pitch.
What's the next one?
Rhythm.
Rhythm? That's your first mode, to slice things. What's the other one? I just said it too. Slice.
Oh, okay.
Now what's the difference? See, most people don't know this. What's the difference between rhythmic mode and slice mode? They do exactly the same thing. But you guys know what the difference is? Slice is beat detective, and rhythmic is elastic audio.
Yeah.
One stretches, one slices. So that's a huge difference, right? So you're probably better off doing drums with slice mode than you are with the rhythmic mode, which a lot of people don't do right. So Now, extracting the groove is very similar. You would, of course, you can't do 8-bar grooves, right? I mean, you don't want to apply 8 bars worth of quantization to something. It's usually like 1 bar. And I think the maximum on this is actually 2 bars, right? So if you had a whole section where it's constantly, you would have to grab 2 bars at a time of that groove and then apply it to the other things. Because you know, there's always this, well, I like the drummer's performance better, but I want to add synthesized drums on top of it. How do I do that? Well, you could actually program it and then apply the drummer's groove 2 bars at a time to your sequence drums.
So you,
Super time consuming, but possible.
so you can add this to MIDI too?
Of course.
Oh,
You can extract audio groove and apply it to MIDI. Groove templates can be applied either or. And I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's the same in Logic. I never use groove, any grooves in Logic.
I've used it in Ableton, but
Yeah, it's in Ableton I have too. But in Logic for some reason, because I like the way the swing percentage works a lot of times. I set a certain swing and then I start tweaking the delay and other things and I get it just right, so I don't need to use a groove. But again, the method is the same, right? Except that you get to capture selection, you press extract, and then you save the extracted groove into your groove. There's an actual groove folder in your Pro Tools thing. So, you know, if you guys play something and you really like of what you did, extract it, man. You don't know, one day, a year down the road, you might say, man, remember that groove I had? Boom, you have it saved as a quantization, which is really cool. Right, so now you know how to do Beat Detective. Yes, sir.
So we're supposed to go back and extract this?
So if you, no, but you can't do 8 bars. It's just too much, because a groove is usually 1 or 2 bar quantization. So you would have to change your selection first, then capture selection so it reflects it here, and then extract groove. You understand? You don't want to extract 8 bars of a groove. I don't even think that would work. I'm not 100% sure, though it might.
Are they still like cut up? Do we need to like consolidate them again? Or is it just...
Let's grab another section for the next
Oh,
thing.
and then do it after?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Are we supposed to be doing this now, or we just...
No. I was just showing you how to
Okay.
do it. You don't have to do it. So actually, don't even close your session. Just leave it open. It's okay, because I just want to walk you through the method of it. So we're going to do elastic audio on the same thing now. So, but let's talk about elastic audio first. So get away from your laptop for a second. When you're working with drum loops, like I have this collection of these really like first generation old school hip hop loops. And I tell you, those things are anything but tight, right? But that's the whole flavor about it. But if you're trying to do things with those sometimes and add them as like an under loop under your stuff, you can't, because the snare is slightly early, the kick's slightly late. And what I do a lot of times is I get it into the session and I start lining things up in the loop with elastic audio with my drums. You see what I'm saying? That way I don't get these weird flams between the loop and my sequence drums or other things. So it's a very good tool for that. Of course, with correcting performances, not just next week we're going to do vocals, but what if you have a bass player and just a few notes of what he played are early or late, right? Very simple. You don't have to go in and chop up and move things around. Go to elastic audio, just grab that section, make sure the other sections have 0 sensitivity. Just grab that section, set your sensitivity, option 0, quantize it, boom, and it falls in place. I do that all the time. Guitar performances too. Now remixing is a great tool, elastic audio, because it lets us, and that's a big difference to Logic, it lets you actually tell the software what the tempo of the audio file is that you're dealing with. Now, what do you do in Logic when you have an audio file you import? You have to press analyze, right? Analyze tempo. And what does it usually spit back? Some weird 10-digit decimal number that's not the true number, right? If the loop was 105, it probably comes back with 104.9765352. And you're like, well, no, it's 105. It's simple, right? So, and it often makes the looping of it a little funky too. So Pro Tools is different in that aspect, that you can actually, if something is tick based, right, which is, tick is how we sequence, right? Tick is the division of a sequencer. If it's tick based, you can actually put it on a track, The elastic property windows look slightly different, and it has original tempo. You just type it in. Why is that great? Well, if I change my session tempo, that will automatically follow. So if you're doing remixes and you're putting in a session, you're already working on the remix, it's 1:30, and you're dumping in this vocal coming from a song that was 110, you can just tell it, hey, this is 110, boom, and it will shrink it to your 1:30 automatically. Automatically play it at the right tempo, which Logic kind of does too, but in Logic you always have the problem is if you import audio, you have to analyze and the tempo doesn't quite always match. Sound design and special effects. Now you guys remember, some of you guys in Wednesday's lab, you start pulling out stuff, or you start quantizing and you start seeing red. Remember seeing that red? And I said red is no good. Red is actually good if you're doing sound design, because really weird stuff happens when you start seeing red. So if you would take a kick and you elastic warp it out till it goes red, try it. And then keep pulling and keep playing it back. And you will hear some interesting things happening to that audio that you would never expect. And you can never create the same thing twice too. Like, it's a very random kind of thing that happens with the audio. So when you get lucky and you pull something out and you create this new Darth Vader sound, you know, that's probably how it happens most of the times. It's just experimenting and pulling things and stretching and just going, taking things beyond what they're supposed to. Now, how does elastic audio help us with film scoring? If you have a certain performance that is matched to what is happening on a film, you can actually, with elastic audio, kind of stretch that performance to match better once something has changed in the scene. And it happens all the time when you're working on film stuff, right? You get your first draft, you did it, and then your second, third draft comes back and this timing of the scene has slightly changed. They went for a different take. Now your music doesn't quite fit anymore. If it's already in audio, very simple, elastic, and start stretching and start making it happen, right? So, you guys remember from watching the time warping tutorial that there are 5 modes. Polyphonic is self-explanatory. It's anything that has more than one note at a time, right? Rhythmic is of course also self-explanatory, except for the fact that it's the only mode that's rhythmic and has pitch change, right? Well, monophonic is the same as rhythmic, a little bit higher quality because it knows it's dealing with single notes, but it doesn't have pitch shift. I have personally never used vari-speed. I cannot honestly tell you. I mean, I read about it, I understand what it does, but I have not used it. So, but what's X-form? You guys remember when they talked about X-form in the video?
It takes forever to process.
Right, so it's not real time, right? These modes, they're real time. This one is rendered only. But here's what you need to know about it. It is much higher quality than the others. To make it possible for you to hear these things live, right, directly, you apply it, you hear it, right? They reduce the processing on it. So, logically, I think that whenever I use these modes, when I'm done and I have what I want, I should change to X-form to get the highest quality possible, right? And that's what I do. When I use elastic audio, once I feel everything is good, I switch to X-form, and it serves several purposes. 1, it gives me the higher quality. 2, it takes it out of my memory. Because remember, everything that's real-time processing works straight off your memory chips and your processor. So if you're thinking, oh, I got 12 tracks of elastic audio and 40 plugins, why is my computer so slow? It's not the plugins, right? It's the real-time processing that's killing it, right? So get rid of it. Go to X-form. Now, please know that don't do this in the homework. If you go to X-form, I will not be able to check your settings, and therefore won't be able to grade it, right? So for the homework, don't go to X-form. But if you ever use elastic audio in your own projects, you should always end up with that X-form mode. So polyphonic, complex loops, multi-instruments, keys, guitars, pads. If you guys ever had worked with Melodyne, Melodyne actually has these, what's it called? The single, where it does the harmonic stuff. What do they call that? You put a guitar in and actually see the individual notes.
Oh,
What do they call that again? Melodyne is the ultimate polyphonic editor.
yeah.
single note access. Whatever, something like that. I'm close. If you can imagine a full piano part and you can go in and change a note in the audio, that's pretty mind blowing.
That's melodic?
Yes,
Sure.
only the full version though. I've used it in things. It's a little more complicated than that. It's a little time consuming, but it's pretty amazing. So it's a little better than this. Drums, all high transient material, wherever time and pitch needs to be edited. Now, the funny thing is, monophonic, the one that we think should have pitch editing, doesn't, right? So this is for any kind of vocals that you just want to fix the time. Any kind of instrument that's solo, right? That doesn't have harmonic content, single note. And then vary speed, links, timeline, and pitch change. So this is the highest quality. Now, monophonic is better than rhythmic, but X-form is better than all of them, okay? That you should always do this at the end, except for the homework. Pitch shifting in elastic audio can only be done to whole clips. So it's very different than flex pitch, right? Where you see the notes and you can just grab each note and just kind of move it around. If you want to fix one note in a phrase, you would have to separate it, right? You just select B, separates it, then you can move the pitch up and down. And you see that in the homework next week, where we'll actually do a vocal and we'll have to pitch shift a few things within elastic audio. You can go up, down 2 octaves on that, by the way. That is in your sensitivity setting. So when you open up the sensitivity setting, if you have a numeric keyboard, by the way, that's numeric keyboard option 5 or command 5? Option 5. It will, it's a very quick way to access it. Since I started using the numeric keyboard in Pro Tools, guys, it drives me crazy when I don't have one. Like, so many shortcuts are on that little pad on the right that I miss them when I'm just on a laptop. It's almost a must-have when you work on Pro Tools. So let's look at just a little bit more. I want to kind of review so we really lock this down for next week. What's the difference visually between an event marker and a warp marker? Do you guys know?
The event markers are on the transient.
Say again?
The event markers are on the transient.
They're both on transients.
Oh, what?
Visually.
Okay.
Visually, look at it. You can actually see it right here. What is that?
That's the
Light
transient.
gray. What is that?
Dark gray.
And thicker, right? What's the difference though? That's still an event marker, right? But it has been activated. If you just have event markers, if you go to analysis view and you switch to warp view, you'll see almost all the same markers, but they're light gray. That means they're not on. That just means they're there. They haven't been changed or modified. Once you click it, it becomes a warp marker, right? Now, if I shift and I grab it and I move it, and I did not activate one marker on each of its sides, everything will move, right? That's why this is a very important word, anchor. Remember that, right? We have to anchor the audio that's in the correct place, or that audio will move too. So if I have one little thing that's off, I gotta make sure I look for the right things. Oh, this is good, anchor it. I look for the next right thing, that's good, anchor it. Now I can shift move everything in between, right? So anchors are very, very important. Now one more time here, warp view. This is exactly the same thing. Now, if analysis didn't have this marker, how come it's there? It's just a flip between the views. But why is it there? Because I added it. And just because I added it doesn't mean analysis has it. Right? So in warp view, I went, and remember everything is double click, right? You want to get rid of a marker? Double click. You want to make a new marker? Double click. It's that simple, right? So I just went there and I said, well, you know what? I do need a marker right there. in warp view. Now, if I would have done this in analysis view and then changed back to warp view, it would also be there. But I did it in warp view. So if I go back to analysis view, it's not there. It doesn't have it as an analysis, but it can still accept it from over here, right? So really understand the difference. Also, what's the difference between this and this? One more time. This
Event marker.
and this.
Event marker. Is that an event marker?
That's an event marker, and that's a.
Forward marker.
Okay, is this one on?
No.
No, it's off, right? It doesn't do anything, right? Now here's the window I was talking about earlier. Now our regular tracks are sample-based, and we're going to keep them there for now, right? Now usually I only put MIDI and tick-based tracks. I keep all my audio in sample-based tracks. But if I would import a drum loop that already is set to a specific time, I would do it in tick mode. Anything that's already kind of coming from a specific tempo into my session that maybe has been sequenced or played before, if I put it in tick mode, it's easier for me to time stretch it or make it fit my session. So we are in this, and this is how our elastic property window looks. Now do not change to tick-based. And I see this sometimes in the homework where for some reason somebody thinks they have to take all the drum tracks and change them to tick-based, which gives you a whole different window in elastic audio, right? And a lot of functions in here we do not need for what we're doing. This all stays the same, but we have this right here. And it tells you the source length that you can actually change, and it also lets you see the tempo. And you can change this tempo by typing. So if you want to put a drum loop in from a loop library you have, and the loop library says it's 93, pull it in, tell Pro Tools it's 93, and it will play it in time for your session automatically. Makes it really easy. Now, we already talked about this. The event sensitivity is your threshold to go from good sounding audio to very erroneous, wobbly audio, right? That is your setting. If you're editing something in Elastic Audio and it sounds really, really bad, it's not Elastic Audio's fault. It's usually yours. Your sensitivity setting is too high. You're doing too much, right? So I always say bring it down as low as you can, where you can still get something done, and add markers by hand. That's just the safest way to do it. Now, have you guys ever seen what happens when you grab a marker and you don't hold shift to the audio? You guys ever seen how that looks?
You don't anchor. You say you don't anchor or you don't hold shift?
No, yeah, but have you ever seen what happens if you don't hold shift and you start pulling a marker and it looks like an accordion? Like the entire track goes, it just goes one direction or the other, right? So that is actually called accordion mode, right? I don't see what exactly you would use that for, but it's a mode. So what you want to make sure is to get what we use range warp, we're only warping specific ranges, right? We have to hold shift before we start grabbing a warp marker.
You accidentally don't hold shift and you want to do it?
Yes, all undos work on Elastic Audio tracks. So everything should undo. You can go back 99 steps if you wanted to. This is not something you can rush through, right? This is kind of a time-consuming job if you really want to do it right. Especially, you know, you guys saw we spent 4 hours on it, and well, we lost an hour on Wednesday, kind of twiddling around. But did we get done? Not really, you know. I mean, to be really done with what we were supposed to do Wednesday, we should have had the time to go back and listen, fix our fills, because I'm sure some of those drum fills were off, and really listen section by section to all of our drums and make sure it's good, right? It's a real, to be a music producer, it takes a real specific person to be really good, right? And that person is somebody that has the urge for all the details to be right, right? And that's exactly when it comes down to something like this. Small little details like weird tom fills not being right or something. You can't let that stuff slide, right? It's just everything has to be right. And if you guys really want to get into this production game, your competition is rough. You're going to have a lot of people that do really amazing jobs, but within that group, there's going to be very few that are always on time, that do that job to the deadlines, right? That get it done when it's supposed to be done, and that do a fantastic job in making sure that everything is right, and that what they submit to the client absolutely is 100%. That's where you separate yourself, right? So make sure you keep that in mind when you work on these kind of things, because there is no almost good, right? There is no this is okay. There is no, we can get away with it. No, it has to be perfect, right? And that's really the attitude you should have with everything that you do, really. But when it comes to audio editing, I feel like this is where it can really bite you in the butt. Because the smallest little things can sometimes, at the end of the mix, give you clicks and you go, did you hear this? While you're almost mastering, you suddenly hear a click that you could have easily avoided by just cross-fading everything or making sure your edits are all good, right? So don't be lazy with that stuff. So, side chaining. Now when we hear the word side chaining, we usually think of external side chain, right? And what's an internal side chain anyway? Has anybody heard of internal side chain? Well, actually, every compressor has an internal side chain because that's what the threshold actually listens to. I want you to think about this. There's a certain signal flow if you think about a compressor, right? The signal comes in, something happens to it right here, and then it comes back out, right? That applies to a gate or compressor, to anything. But that's something that's happening to it. There has to be several components to that. One component that listens to audio, and one component that applies things to audio. Follow me? That thing that listens to the audio, that's actually the threshold, right? So if we have a separate module that listens to it, can't we do stuff to that? It's not the audio that's being processed, it's the audio that's being listened to. So if you don't apply an external sidechain, there's always the internal sidechain. And that's exactly how these things are wired. Does that make sense to you all? This is an important concept. We got to make sure that that actually works. Now, external sidechain, the same signal that we're splitting off, that main input that's coming in, right, for the threshold to listen to. Just think about signal, threshold, right? So signal comes in, goes up, and the threshold listens here, applies what it needs to apply to the signal back down, and it comes processed out. Now, we don't have to send that internal signal up, right? We can send an external signal to the threshold. Now it listens to something completely different. You guys follow me? You guys know this concept already. I'm just going to refine it a little bit today. So all kinds of stuff you can do with that signal that's going through the threshold, because we could EQ it different. We could take the same signal and EQ it different before it gets to the threshold. Or we could send a completely different signal and have a kick compressor bass, right? That's the external sidechain. But everybody seems to understand the external sidechain, but there seems to be an issue with the internal sidechain, right? So for that to truly be understood, let's really take these plugins apart a little bit and really see what we have here. And please pay good attention here, because this is where a lot of you guys struggle. So what we see here is a gate and a compressor. Easily confused. They could have made them look a little different, couldn't they? They made them look exactly the same. But one thing that you will see is that you have a range of how much there is a reduction, and you don't have a range here. You only have a knee. Attack, release, hold looks, there's no hold, there's a gain here. And ratio is the same. Now, would a normal gate have a ratio? What does a ratio do on a gate? Right? You guys follow me? All a gate needs is, at what point do you want me to open up? And at what point do you want me to close? That's all a gate has, right? So what's a ratio? I want you to look at the exact name of what this is called. And we talked about it at the end of the last class. This is not just a gate. This is an expander gate. Remember what an expander does? Say it loud.
About the threshold.
Oh, you got it wrong.
Is
A
that-
compressor reduces dynamic range for everything exceeding the threshold. Think opposite, what would that be?
It
Everything that's under the threshold is being pulled down. Okay? That's an expander. But it sounds to us like that everything above the threshold is being pulled up. Why? Because almost all expanders have an auto gain function. So instead of you hearing the level under the thing drop, you hear the whole thing come up, which makes the louder signal sound louder. You follow? So that's the difference. Gate compressor. Now, when you enable this, you get an external side chain. So what does this stuff do if the external side chain is not on? Does it do anything? This EQ here and this EQ here?
It's not on,
Yes, it
no.
does. And that's where the big problem comes in, because most people don't realize this. This can be also applied to your internal side chain. So I want you to think about the usage of this. If I have an overhead track, right? Snare, kick. What's an overhead? Everything, right? We got cymbals, we got snare, we got kick, we got toms. When we compress this overhead track, we really want to compress the transient things in it. You don't really want to compress the cymbals, right? So what could we do here so the compressor doesn't listen to the cymbals?
Reduce the highs.
Filter the highs out, because that's what the threshold's listening to. This is not affecting what we're hearing. This is a big difference that we need to understand, right? This does not affect what we hear. This only affects, can you sign in, please?
Yeah.
And put your time in, please. This only affects what the threshold listens to, right? So if I go in here and I set my filter to 3K, now suddenly it doesn't hear the cymbals anymore. It won't react to it, right? Okay, let's take it the other way. We have a super boomy kick, right? What does a compressor always listen to first? The loudest signal, right? So if it's 50 hertz mostly in that, it will listen to that mostly, but it will react very different because that's a very slow frequency. We want the compressor to react a little faster. We'll take that low filter, right? And we'll bring that up so it doesn't listen to 50 as much. Now you have two options here. What are these? What is this? And what is this? Tell me what these symbols are, guys. You better know this.
See.
Can't read.
Okay, one looks like this.
That's a filter.
High pass filter and
Low pass.
Well, that is a high pass filter. And then what's this one?
what was it?
Bell. The most common of all EQs, guys. It's a bell, right? So definitely gives us a lot of extra power over what our compressor listens to. And we need to use that power, right? We need to use that power to be more defined about what I want the compressor to do. If I have, for instance, a kick and a snare on the same track, but I want the compressor only to react to the snare, I can, right? I simply bring what the threshold listens to, filter up, so now it only listens to the snare. Or vice versa, I bring the high pass filter down, the low pass filter up, and I can listen only to the kick. Yes, sir?
Does this EQ happen after the compression or?
No, no.
before?
That EQ only happens to what the threshold listens to. You don't hear that
Happening
EQ.
while compression.
So remember that signal flow chain I was showing you? Signal passes through, right? It gets split off, goes through the threshold. That's where the EQ is. You don't hear it.
So it happens
If
while-
you want to hear it, you press the monitor button.
Okay.
There you can listen to what the threshold's listening to. Yeah, you follow? So it's the same thing here too. If you guys use the channel strip, I'm not a huge channel strip fan. I think it's okay. But if you have a huge session and you really want to bring down your processing, these are a little bit more efficient than using a compressor and a EQ. I'm not a huge fan. Now, mentioned this already. What time is it?
Is 10:04.
Okay, good. The gate has an automatic look ahead, but it's only if this is enabled, by the way, of 2 milliseconds. Now, you guys know there's no look ahead in the analog world, right? It only exists in the digital world, which is a beautiful thing because it makes it possible for us to have gates open earlier than they could in the analog world. With a 2 millisecond look ahead before it reaches the threshold of the gate, we can actually, like, not lose that hit in the front, which you lose with an analog gate. Let's break this apart a little bit more here. So, this is now understood, sidechain, right? So if I press this, it's external sidechain, you set the external sidechain here. If I don't press this, it doesn't mean this does not work. It just means it's internal, right? And this will modify the signal the compressor listens to and applies its compression. It does not change the audio we hear. So I know it's a kind of a tricky concept, but there's two components to a compressor, the audio we hear and the audio the compressor hears. That's really what we need to focus on. Now, what does the knee do? Does anybody know? Hmm?
A what?
What does the knee do? I'm not talking about that knee. I'm talking about that knee. No, you don't know? Okay. Well, the knee, if you guys pull that compressor up and you pull the knee setting up, go ahead, you got it up. Tell me what you see when you watch the graphic.
Just the sharpness of the slope.
Uh-huh, that's very good. So you see how this is really, I say this is very selective right now, right? It's like, it's either this or I'm not working, right? When you pull that knee up, it becomes a little bit more relaxed and you get close to that and it says, okay, I can accept this. I'm gonna start compressing now. In the same way on the way down, it's a little bit more relaxed. So the higher the knee, the more curvy, and that means less selective, that threshold setting really is. You understand? The higher you bring that knee up, the more it looks around the threshold and starts compressing. Where if the knee's all the way down, it's 24 and that's it, right? You understand? So if you want to smoothen up something, and where could that be helpful? If you sequence something and you set all your velocities to 100, would you need it then? Probably not, right? Because you have very strict levels. But what if you have a live kick and it's like, doo, 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 right? Now you got a problem, because only that loud one's going to open your compressor up. But what if you open the knee up a little bit, make it a little relaxed, give it a shot of whiskey? You know? That's what that is. It relaxes the compressor a little bit, right? So that could be quite helpful, especially with live stuff. And also sometimes when your compressor is too aggressive on something, you can just go, okay, just back up a little bit, the threshold, and then open your knee up a little bit. You'll still, compression a lot of times is a compromise. You know, you want to go for, you're looking for something specific, and that one compressor might get you a little closer. If you get really good at it, it might get you there all the way, but it takes time. Now, with compressors, when you first load them, there's usually set to a pretty fast setting of 10 milliseconds. Now, whenever I open somebody's compressor and I see 1080, you know what I know what they know? Nothing.
That's default.
Because it's the default setting. That means you didn't do anything but pull the plug-in in, right? So, no good. 3 to 1, 1080 minus 24 is the default setting. When I see that on a track, I just want to take it off because it doesn't do anything. The trick about compression is, and this is really how I learned, this is so different than how you guys are learning compression. When I learned compression, I was on a board. I couldn't even see what that thing was. I was just turning knobs, right? And I suddenly go, ooh, I like what's happening to the bass. It's kind of cool. What does that say? Oh, it says ratio, cool. I didn't know what I was doing, right? And the thing is, you don't really see a graphical display of your threshold or the signal coming in. You don't see none of that. You don't have any visual input. You gotta listen, right? That's the biggest problem we have nowadays. We're looking for quick solutions, default settings for kicks and default settings for snares. There's no such thing, right? Every kick, every snare, every bass, every guitar is different. So we have to use this to find the right setting. But we do have to understand a few principles. And if we just throw the math out for a second, I know we're going to go through this probably in the lab. Jeremy loves to throw that math stuff at you guys. He's going to break down the 3 to 1, the 4 to 1, the 10 to 1, and that's great. You should know how to do that, right? But at the end of the day, nobody cares what the numbers are, right? It only matters of can you get to that result you're looking for. And for that, you have to know certain things. One, the higher the ratio, without the math, the more aggressive the compressor. Very simple rule, right? You bring that ratio up, it's going to get really, really tough. And it's going to get to the point where at 10 to 1, it's not a compressor anymore. It's a limiter. Because no matter what you throw at it, it's not going to let more than 1 dB through. Extra, right? So, attack times. Attack times are, I have one rule about attack time that I know that works every time. Fast transient sounds need faster attack times than slow sustained sounds. Okay, follow me on this. Have you guys ever compressed a piano? It sounds compressed very quickly. As soon as you start hitting more than 2 or 3 dB of compression, you go, that piano sounds compressed. Now you hit 2 or 3 dB compression on a kick, you go, I can't hear any compression, right? Because, and this is really our fault, our mistake, is we can't pick it up that fast. Our brain's not quick enough. It's happening, it's compressing it, but our brain's going, I can't hear that, that's too quick. Whereby the piano's going, oh, here it is. And it's just because the notes are long, your brain goes, oh, I can hear that compression, right? So the trick is between attack and release time, know what you want first. Now, what do you most of the times use a compressor for? What's the purpose?
Dynamics.
To do what?
Squish.
Squish dynamics. So reduce, let's say your main purpose is reduce dynamic range. Or if you do an upward expansion, increase dynamic range. But you're changing the dynamic range. That's your main purpose. Anybody else?
You can EQ too.
If you have multi-band compression, you can use a compressor as an EQ. Yes, you can. But what's the purpose of that? That's more EQing than compression, right? The purpose for me, 80% of the time when I pull up a compressor, is not dynamic range. It's shaping. Right? I want more punch, or I want less punch, I want more snap. Something about the sound that I want to change gets me to compression, not the dynamic range. Because you know what? If it's a huge dynamic range, I go in and hand clip gain that. You know? I would rather deal with it that way than have dynamic range change the quality of the sound, have compression change the quality of the sound. Because to change, and this is really important here, guys, to change the dynamic range of something, your attack time should be the fastest it can be, period. And your release time should be pretty long, because you would want that thing to kick in and stay on, right? What happens if you don't do a fast release time and a slow release time, and you have a strong compressor? It will sound like it's pumping, right? Because it's going in, and you start hearing this pumping sound on something, right? If you start hearing that, you know what the solution for that is? Bring the release time up. That way it stays on, right? But of course, the more compression you kick in like that, the more it's going to change the quality of the sound, right? There's a sonic change we can hear, right? When we overcompress something, what happens? It's distorting, it's adding harmonics, sometimes good. Sometimes those harmonics can be good, depends. But the funny thing about compression to me is always, and it's factually not true, by the way, Like scientifically, anybody that understands audio would say, well, that's not true. But to us, it always reduces the most dominant frequencies first. So if we have a kick that we're compressing really hard, what's the first thing we're gonna lose?
Okay.
Low end, right? If you have a really nice sounding vocal and you start compressing it really hard, you know what you lose? Top end, bottom end. It starts sounding like this, right? This is the dominant frequencies. Why is that? I can't explain it to you. If you would analyze the compressed signal afterwards, there's no uneven reduction. The frequencies are all reduced the same, but it's just something that we experience that way. So, attack times. Okay, let's go back to drums. We're still on drums, right? We're not talking vocals. What's the difference in attack time? I want you to think between a kick and a snare on a compressor. Any ideas? Let's talk about it. What do you think? Hmm?
The width of the sound?
The length of the width of the sound.
Yeah.
When you say width, you're talking about something being stereo, right? Or do you mean depth?
Yeah.
Depth, okay. So kick's definitely longer, right, than the snare, yes. It's definitely not a sound, it's like, the snare's more like, right? So, what's another big difference between a kick and a snare? Cool.
Snare's like more piercing.
It's definitely more piercing, right? Where does that piercing come from when you think of a snare? Is it the speed of it? The transient of it? It's a very quick transient, right?
Yeah.
If we just look at a snare, we see this immediate whoop and out, right? It's very short. Now if we look at a kick, how long is that usually? It kind of comes in a little slope, it stays on a little longer, and then it comes down, right? So I have a little video in the reference section that I want you all to watch. It's 5 minutes long. It's called Basic Compression Principles. And it shows you, if you are not sure what your attack time should be, how to figure it out scientifically, right? If we look, for instance, at a snare, and it's only 10 milliseconds long, and I set my attack time to 15 milliseconds, is that going to work? No, because the snare's already gone, right? So if I want that snare to really pop, but the whole signal is only 20 milliseconds long, I can't make it 2 milliseconds either, because that will choke it, right? It will attack it before it even had a chance to come through, right? So where do I need to put my attack time? Well, somewhere in between, right? I want a little bit to come through and then I want to smack it. That's going to make my ear feel like it's smacking harder. That's shaping the sound. Same thing with the kick. If my kick waveform is 35, 40 milliseconds long, right? And I put my attack time at 2 milliseconds, what am I doing to that kick? I'm choking it. I'm going, I don't want you to do a sound, right? That's basically what you're doing. You're choking it, right? But if I go put that at like 30, then I get that punch to come through, and then I'm compressing the snot out of it, making that punch sound even more aggressive. Because that's funny how that works in our ear, right? If we take that signal and we kind of chop it in half, and take the second half of it and push it down, it makes that first one appear louder. And that's exactly why we think it's punchier, right? Now, the closer we get that attack time to like that front, it's gonna make it sound what I call clickier, right? So if you want more of that pedal, that little smack sound that pedal makes, and you're not having a lot of it, you set your attack time pretty quick, 5-7 milliseconds, very aggressive ratio and aggressive threshold, and this is how you learn it. Take any kick you have and start playing with these settings and go for different goals. Or let me try to get more kick. Or let me try to get more click. Let me try to get more punch. And start playing with attack and release times. That's how you learn it, right? Only took me 20 years to understand. So you guys got 2 weeks. So, but if we use the same, what we talked about just a little earlier, the side chaining, as a tool, there's a lot of things we can do. If you have very sustained long bass lines, and there's a kick going like this, right? It's probably going to have a hard time cutting through. If you mix in that bass right and nice and fat, it might have a hard time cutting through that bass line, right? What do? Well, you can actually put a compressor on the bass and sidechain the kick into it so it ducks the bass every time the kick hits. Now, our ears can't tell unless you solo it. You can duck it aggressively. Like if you hear it solo, you go, wow, that is probably way too much. And you put it in the track and you go, I don't hear it. I just hear the kick cutting through. Now the importance here is, if you use it for ducking, these settings have to be specific, right? Now, the attack time should be the absolute fastest you can make it, because the signal is in command now, not our times anymore, right? When the signal comes in, it has to react immediately to it, and when the signal goes out, it has to immediately release. That means these release times should be fairly low. And then all you really, if you have the sidechain set correctly, the kick's coming in, you might even filter that a little bit. That works on internal and external sidechain. You set your attack time fast, you set your ratio, probably 3 to 1 is a good starting point. And then you lower your threshold until you hear that bass drop out, right? And then you put it in the bass and it's go. Vocal ducking. Like a lot of times when I work with EDM stuff, anybody of you guys do any electronic music? A little bit? Okay. So you know EDM production is heavy, right? There's like a million things going on, always, through the entire track. And a lot of times we have synth melodies going on at the same time. There's a lead going on, like a vocal. And that doesn't work. It's in the same frequency range. It often messes with each other. One trick that I use is, instead of trying to write a whole bunch of automation, I use the lead vocal to duck the synth lead. So every time the vocalist stops singing, the synth melody comes back up. The guy sings, boom, it pushes the synth melody down. So I make things control each other in a mix instead of me trying to take control of it. A de-esser is nothing but a sidechain compressor. You guys know what a de-esser does, right? It reacts to, right? How does it do that?
That's when that frequency hits.
Right. So what comes in has to be filtered, right? It takes the same signal, filters it down to the S's, sends the S's back through a gate, so only the S's get through, and then that S is then sent into the input of the compressor, pushing everything down. That's all a de-esser is. If you don't have a de-esser plugin, make your own. Use a gate and a compressor, and you can totally do it, right? Now, there's a difference though. The Pro Tools de-esser doesn't have this, but good de-esser plugins have a split and a wide mode. And the difference here is, and this is important to understand, in split mode, it listens to the high frequency, but compresses everything, all frequencies. Or is it the other way around? Wow, I gotta think about that one for a second. Well, either one of the modes, and this is how most de-essers work, is it listens to the S's, but it ducks the entire thing. In split mode, it only takes down that frequency it's listening to. You understand? So that's actually more the de-esser I prefer. It's a more precise, just take the frequency out, don't take the whole level down. If you guys not really into EDM, this one's really not going to make sense, but a lot of things you hear nowadays are doing this on the up compression, so it feels like the kick's on 4, right? And the whole track feels like it has a slight pump to it. That's actually putting the kick on the compressor on the main bus, ducking the whole entire mix down. So using kick as a ducking again. A couple of channel strip specifics. One, if you guys have Pro Tools open, I want you to open the plugin, because this is one that a lot of people don't know. Channel strip. Everybody has it open?
Why are they all like pretty much mono?
Why they all what?
They're all labeled as mono. I didn't see any stereo options.
Oh, because you're on a mono track. You can't pull up a stereo plugin on a mono track. Now if you go down to some of the other tracks that are in this session, like here, then you should have stereo.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Logic, it pulled up stereo regardless if it was mono or
But I
not.
hate it, Logic. This is consumer crap. You shouldn't be able to pull up a stereo plugin on a mono track. And here's the real problem. You want to know the real problem with that is? That you can make something mono and don't even know you're doing it. Because I've like used plugin on my kick, and I'm pulling the plugin, the EQ over to my overheads, forgetting that it's mono, turning my overheads mono. Can't happen here in Pro Tools. It will not let you. But Logic will let you pull a mono plugin onto a stereo track and turn that track mono.
But you can turn mono tracks into stereo.
Yeah, but they're not stereo. There's no such thing. There's no such thing in making mono stereo. Doesn't exist. It's impossible. All stereo is two different signals on left and right. If I take the same signal and make it left and right, it's still mono. You understand?
Would
The only
you
thing,
run through a splitter?
huh?
Like a
It's
splitter?
still mono unless you start creating harmonics in certain frequencies and spread those out. I can take that same signal and not make it, it will not be 5.1 because I make 6 channels out of it. Not how it works. The only thing, the true stereo is because the signal on the left is different than the signal on the right. And the things you hear in the middle are called phantom center, and the only reason they sound in the middle is because they're the same on the left and right. That's why they sound in the middle. Does that make sense? But you cannot take a mono signal and make it wider. Not by duplicating it, not by putting a stereo plugin on it, unless you use a frequency spreader. And what happens there is it creates harmonics, right? And it makes a difference between left and right. That's the only time we hear things right. But let's not get into that today because I don't have time for it. One thing that a lot of people don't know is that the order of how this plugin works can actually be changed. When you originally load it up, it probably has, what's the top one you see? What's the order right now from left to right of the light blue buttons?
EQ, filter, dynamic volume.
Just like this, right? EQ, filter, dynamic volume, right? There's a little arrow right up there. Click that.
The down arrow.
And now you have 4 choices of the order of that plugin. So if you want to compress first, then EQ, you can. Just got to change the order, right? So this is quite important. Because sometimes we want to compress before we EQ, and sometimes we want to EQ, and sometimes we want to filter, you know. I don't think you can filter first, can you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you can? Okay. Well, cool. So that changed the order of processing. Here are the actual enabled plugins that you see in a row. So I guess the gate is not part of this order. Or maybe it's part of the dynamic. It would be part of the dynamic. So you would EQ first, then filter, which is down here. High pass filter on this is right here. See where my mouse is?
Okay.
That's the high pass filter. You gotta click it and enable it before it works. You will see, you see this right here, this weird little curve?
Mm-hmm.
That's the high pass filter. You will see that. The more you pull it up. Now in this course we're going to talk, more and more about high pass filter. And there's only 2 tracks that should not have a high pass filter on it, and that is kick and a bass. Everything else, and I mean everything else, should have a high pass filter between 50 and 75 hertz minimum.
Would
Some
that have
things
a
you can
low
go
pass
higher.
filter?
High pass filter.
No, kicking a bass. Would they have low pass filter?
Nope. I don't use low pass filters at all. Unless you have a signal that you want to get air rid of completely, which is hissy sound. You got a hissy sound on something, tape noise, something that you really want to get rid of, then you use a low pass filter.
But what about the bleed? The bleed that's coming in
From?
like the hi-hats or?
Sure, you could. I would shelve it before I low pass filter it. We have a high shelf, right? And if I want to get lower some of those higher frequencies, I would rather shelve it, because filtering is very aggressive, right? And of course, if I have, for instance, the sub kick mic, right? Do I need anything above 100 on a sub kick mic? No. So yes, a low pass filter could be applied to that to get rid of any additional noises in there. But that's very, very specific, you know. So in here we also have internal and external side chain. We also have a filter section for the internal one, just like on the regular one, right? This applies to internal and external side chain. And what else do we have? I think that's it. Yeah, oh, there's one difference here. On our regular compressor, it always listens to peak as far as I know. But here we can actually change it so it listens to average, which is the RMS. Now you guys know RMS is the 60% line of your waveform, so the average of the entire volume at 60%. So it's a very different way for a compressor to work, to be able to do that. Now in Logic, I gotta say, it's actually a really cool thing. On their multiband compressor, you can go evenly from peak 0 to 200 milliseconds RMS. So it's very specific on how you can apply that. These also have a notch, by the way. So they have a high pass, low pass, and a notch filter. Common ways of using sidechain processing: duck the bass with the kick, gate the bass from the kick. I'll tell you one that's a lot of people, when they see how it works, they go, wow, why did I never think of this? What is usually the one signal in the overheads that's absolutely too loud? Usually snare, right? Now, if properly mic'd and you have a big, nice, high, tall ceiling when you record it, snare level is probably going to be fine. But in a tight room like we're in, the snare level is sometimes louder than the actual overheads, right? That's not good, because we want to get some of our individual snare levels in here, right? We want to blend that. So what do? Take the snare, clean it up first with a little expansion gate, make sure it's very clean track, send that as a side chain compressor on your overhead tracks. So it ducks the snare down in the overheads. You see? Ducking is a powerful thing. If I have a kick track that has too much snare in it, how do I get rid of the snare in the kick? In the kick track. Set the snare there and compress it, right? So you can use signals to control each other and to clean up things by using side chaining, right? All right, so one part in your homework is going to be to spot something. This is kind of like a post-production technique that is primarily used when you do things to movies, because you get certain times that they want you to do certain sound effects. They tell you at 2 minutes, 36 and 25 frames, we need an explosion right here, and you have to put it right there. So that's what we usually use spot mode for. But just to review our modes for a second. What are our modes? Our 4 modes in Pro Tools.
Grid.
Shuffle, spot,
Slip and grid.
slip, and grid. But there are two
Grid.
grid modes. Don't forget that. Very important.
Relative grid.
Don't use, most of the times you actually use relative and not regular grid, right? But spot mode, we don't use that much. I actually probably use it more than most, because instead of me copying something to specific locations, I often use option spot, which option makes a copy when I click it, and then spot, I spot it to the new spot. It makes it so much easier, because I see the old time right there. It's going to tell me, oh, it's bar 53221. Oh, I want it at bar 155221. All I gotta do is change the number, boom, and then now I have a copy at that location, right? So it's a very quick way of moving audio around in Pro Tools to me. But for us, it's just an exercise to understand how it actually works. Another thing I want to point out in Pro Tools that's just amazing. I know you guys probably think I hate Logic. I don't hate Logic. I do 80% of my work in Logic, but it's a consumer product. You know, and it's good for sequencing, but when it comes to real professional work, I gotta say Pro Tools kicks its butt, period, right? So, when you record something in Pro Tools, it automatically writes into the WAV file information, or let's say within the session file, its original timestamp. It has a stamp. which is cool. That means if I ever move it out of place, all I gotta do is what?
Go back to view.
Spot mode, click it, look down there, and push that up to there. That little button right there, it tells you your original timestamp. As soon as you push that little button, it puts it in start position, press enter, and your file is back at its original location. Now, that doesn't always work if it wasn't actually recorded in that session. And the start time of the session wasn't the same as the start time of the session you're in now. Like, for instance, you'll see it next week, like the original vocal session was done at a session that had a start time of 1 hour. We're in a session that has a start time of 0. If I press original timestamp, it's going to jump 1 hour over that direction into my session. So you have to make sure that it's actually representative of the session you are in.
Create a timestamp.
Hmm?
You can create a timestamp for.
Oh, and you can create timestamps too, that's right. How do you do that again? I never do that.
Shift Command down, I think. I'd have to.
So you can
I'd have
time
to get on there and do it. But.
that you can actually do in Logic too. Now, if you have something recorded in Logic, in that session, it will have timestamps within that session. But if you take it out of that session, the timestamp is gone. Not necessarily with Pro Tools audio files. They still have a timestamp, it's just not relating to your session. Right? So, what we want to do in our homework is there's a list and there's a zip file. Files to import is a zip file that has 10 little wave files, something like that. It's a splash, it's an explosion, it's a wind, it's a couple of things. You guys see a couple of sounds. Let's just say a couple of sounds, right? And then there is a spot list. It's a little text document that will give you the times of where these clips are supposed to be. And there's also a description of, wait a minute, no, shoot, I went out of it.
Technology.
Right, so there's a description on the spot list on what tracks you're supposed to make, top effects 2, and bottom effects, and what tracks each of the sound goes on and how many times. So if you see splash and a time and another time, that means it's supposed to be in 2 places, not 1, right? If you see reversed something and you see 3 times, then those are the 3 places you're supposed to spot them to. Does it make sense? It's very easy. And we can look at it a little bit more in the lab if you want to. But first thing you should always look on a spot list is, what's my reference? Is it empty? Is it time code? Is it bars or beats? Or is it minutes and seconds? Hours is minutes and seconds. So when you actually spot, make sure that your time scale is actually set to minutes and seconds. Okay? Now there's 2 ways to actually place a clip. And the easiest way, of course, is you import all to your clip list. You grab it from the clip list onto the newly created track in spot mode. You pull it over, window pops up, you type in the number, you press enter, and it goes to that location. Simple, right? I actually like another method a little better. Is I actually put my play bar where I want it to be. Right? So if I put in the main display, I put the time in that I want the sample to go. First I click on the track and then I change the location of my play bar, right? Now how do I get the audio file there? As simple as holding control, dragging the file in. Because you guys know what control is in Pro Tools? Very important key. It's a vertical lock. That means if I move files this way and I don't want them to go this way, I hold control. But it also means that if wherever my play bar is, if I'm locking that vertically, I can drag that file in and it's going to jump right to my play bar. Does that make sense? So those are the 2 methods you can use to actually import things. To me, that one is a little quicker, but it's all in what you want. You know, you can do it however you want. All I care about is that they're in the right locations. And another thing I'm going to want you to do in the homework is
to write the volume a little bit on them because they're really loud. I want you to kind of create a little bit of a rough mix of this session, but we'll talk about that a little later. I'm going to be gone, and I hope Jeremy's going to be here for this lab. If not, because I have graduation at 11:15. I don't usually look this nice.
Yeah, I was wondering. I'm a little sharp.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let me turn on this. Turn off the stream.